She can't handle this. Chief laughed. Then Black Ops helicopters descended, demanding her gunshot wounds smell like copper soaked in something burnt. 14 years ago, I knew that smell so well I could assess caliber by it. Now the thing I smell most nights is the industrial lemon of the floor cleaner the overnight custodial staff uses on Wing C. And somewhere in that fact is the entire story of the last 4 years of my life. My name is Danny Reeves. I work the overnight float at St. Augustine Medical Center. I push carts. I change lines. I stay out of the way. And on the night this happened, I had been doing all three with considerable professional dedication when Chief of Emergency Medicine Dr. Paul Grantham looked at me across the nurses' station and laughed. Not at a joke. At me. At the idea of me. At the suggestion, apparently, that a woman who pushed carts and changed lines and stayed out of the way could be trusted to handle anything more demanding than a supply audit. They would correct that impression. They just needed to arrive first. And they were already in the air. I had been at St. Augustine for 22 months. Long enough to know that Dr. Grantham took his coffee in the same ceramic mug every shift. That the cardiac monitors in Bay 3 drifted 2 beats low, and that the east stairwell door on the second floor had a broken latch that nobody had fixed, because maintenance submitted the work order through the wrong system. I know these things because I pay attention the way people pay attention when paying attention was once the difference between coming home and not coming home. The night float rotation suited me exactly. No department head. No continuity. No one learned your name well enough to ask questions about where you came from or why you moved the way you did, with that particular economy of motion. Never fumbling. Never wasting a gesture. Always knowing exactly where your hands were in relation to your body, which is not a thing most people know without thinking about it, but which I have not been able to stop knowing since 2012. The ER at St. Augustine smelled the way all ERs smell, antiseptic over the copper and oil undertone of a room that has seen everything human bodies can do to themselves, and sounded the way all ERs sound, the disjointed, erratic chime of monitors, and the specific weight of clogs on linoleum, and someone in the second bay asking for water for the 3rd time in 20 minutes. Overhead, fluorescent lights hummed at that low abrasive frequency that lives behind your eyes around hour 3 and doesn't leave. To the residents, all of this was emergency. To me, it was Tuesday. I had logged my exits the moment I walked in at 11:10. 2 primary, 1 secondary through the ambulance bay, 1 fire door at the northeast corner that would stick on the push bar if you didn't angle your shoulder. Filed and forgotten. I was restocking compression bandages in Bay Access Supply when the charge nurse, a compact, efficient woman named Sandra, who wore her seniority like a second set of scrubs, found me and told me Dr. Grantham wanted the medication cart in Bay 5 re-inventoried before the 2 a.m. shift change. Tonight? I asked. He was specific, Sandra said, in the tone of a person who relays orders she did not choose. I went. Dr. Paul Grantham was, by the professional consensus of St. Augustine's ER staff, brilliant. This was almost certainly true. He had the publications, the residency pedigree, the 12-year tenure in a trauma center that had seen things the average suburban ER only read about. He was also, by the professional consensus of everyone below him in the hierarchy, exactly the kind of brilliant that had never once been asked to question itself, which gives a particular shape to a person over time, a slight lean forward, a tendency to speak before the other person is finished, and a laugh that emerged not from humor exactly, but from the specific pleasure of confirming something he already believed. I was re-inventorying the medication cart in Bay 5 when he came through. "Reeves," he said. His voice carried to the nurse's station. to the resident at the computer, to the tech pulling a blood draw 3 bays down. He always pitched it that way. He wanted the room. Dr. Grantham, when you're done counting pills, I need the compression stock in Supply A recounted. There was a discrepancy on the last inventory. I completed that inventory, I said. The count was correct. The discrepancy was a data entry error on the prior sheet. He looked at the cart, he looked at me, and you're confident in that assessment. Yes, right, the laugh came, a single exhale through the nose that said everything it needed to. Sandra, he turned. Make sure someone checks Reeves's count before we close the shift. He moved on, without waiting for a response. Sandra looked at me from across the station. I looked at the cart. The muscle along the outside of my right forearm tensed once, and I told it to stand down, and it did. I went back to counting. Dr. Grantham had no idea that the woman he'd just asked to have double-checked had performed battlefield trauma triage on 16 casualties simultaneously during the 2014 Kandahar airfield attack. Alone, for 40 minutes, with instruments she'd improvised from what was available before the surgical team reached her position. He did not know this. He knew I pushed carts and counted pills. These were, in his estimation, the sum of what I was. I took my break at 1:45. The break room smelled of burned coffee and old takeout, and the specific institutional loneliness of a room that exists for people to be briefly human in. I sat with my back to the wall. I have tried to stop doing this in civilian spaces, and I cannot. And I held the coffee. And I did not drink it. And I thought about nothing, which was a discipline I developed sitting in tactical silence at Bagram in 2013, waiting for extractions that sometimes came and sometimes didn't. The piece of shrapnel in my right shoulder ached the way it aches when I've been lifting, and I'd been lifting. It always reminded me it was there when I needed reminding the least. I was here because I needed to be no one for a while. That was the honest version. The less honest version, the one I gave Sandra when she asked why a nurse with my level of certification was working the night float, was that I liked the flexibility. Both things were true. The flexibility was real. But the deeper truth was that I had come off a contractor deployment cycle in 2020 and spent 2 years after that doing things I cannot put in this story. And one day I woke up and I could not remember the last time I had made a decision that didn't have a body count attached to it, and I needed to be somewhere where the worst thing that happened was a data entry error on a compression bandage inventory. I had been doing a reasonable job of achieving that. I was good at invisible. I had trained for it, after all. The problem with invisible is that certain things can still see you. At 2:17, Dr. Grantham came back to the station, and this time he had the on-call attending, Dr. Ferrara, with him. And there was a veteran in Base 7, a man named Kowalski, 64, Iraq era, both knees replaced. A respiratory presentation that had been triaged at intake as moderate, whose oxygen saturation had been drifting for 40 minutes without anyone adjusting his treatment protocol. I had watched it through the bay window twice on passes. The pattern was not moderate. His SAT is at 92, I said. I was at the station, and they were at the station, and the chart was between us. Grantham looked at me with the expression of a man who has already filed the source of information under a category that determines how much weight to give it. It's within acceptable range. It's been trending down for 40 minutes. The rate of decline is noted, he said, by the attending physician. He pulled the chart. Ferrara, let's adjust his position and recheck in 30. I looked at Kowalski through the bay window. He was looking at the ceiling. He had the face of a man who has stopped expecting the room to act on his behalf. I knew that face. I had seen it on people who were right to have stopped expecting it. and on people who were wrong to have stopped, and the difference between those two groups was usually the person standing next to them, and whether that person decided to act. I did not act. I made the decision not to act. I want to be clear that I understood the decision I was making, and I made it anyway, because the decision was, you are not that person here. You are the inventory. You are the cart. You are the count. And that decision would hold, I told myself, because I had held it for 22 months, and I was good at it. Something was coming. I felt it at 2:26, a vibration through the floor that didn't match the building's ambient frequency, too heavy, too rhythmic, too far outside the signature range of the civilian medevac that used the roof helipad on the north end. I felt it in the soles of my feet and in the fillings in my back molars, which is where you feel a Sikorsky, a 60, before you hear it. If you have spent enough time near landing zones to have learned that distinction in your body rather than your head. I put my hands in my pockets. Not here. I said it to myself in the specific voice I use for orders, which is not a voice that argues back. Not here. Not tonight. Not my problem. And then the SAT alarm in Bay 7 went off, not the drift alarm, the hard alarm, the one that means the acceptable range has been left behind, and I heard it from the station, and I heard Ferrara say something. And I heard Grantham say something back, and the voices were elevated in the way that voices elevate when training meets a situation it hasn't fully prepared for. I stayed at the station. My hands in my pockets had begun to shake. I noticed this with clinical detachment. My hands had not shaken since a fob in Nangarhar in 2015. The shaking was information. Reeves, Sandra, appeared beside me. Her voice was careful. Doctor, Grantham wants the float clear of the Bay corridor during the active response. She looked at me in a way that said she did not fully agree with what she was delivering. He was specific. I looked at Bay 7. I looked at my hands. I went to the corridor. I stood in the east corridor with my back against the wall, and I listened to the SAT alarm through the door. And then I felt the building move. Not a tremor, a pressure change. The specific barometric shift that precedes a heavy rotor landing in close proximity. The kind of shift I have felt in Kandahar and Jalalabad, and a rooftop in a city I am not permitted to name, and which I had not felt in 22 months of fluorescent lights and cart inventories. The ceiling tiles in the corridor vibrated. The overhead light swung 2 degrees. The SAT alarm in Bay 7 was still sounding. I closed my eyes for 3 seconds. I opened them. Through the east corridor window I could see the hospital's overflow parking lot, and in that parking lot, descending with the specific tactical deliberateness of aircraft that do not ask permission before they land, were 2 Boeing AH/MH-6M Little Birds, and behind them, settling onto the concrete with a weight that I felt through the building's foundation, a single MH-60M Black Hawk. Not medical markings, not civilian registration. Government black, no external livery, the rotor wash flattening every car antenna in a 40-foot radius. Sandra said something behind me that I did not hear. The ER's automatic doors did not open fast enough. They don't, for people who move like this. 3 operators went through the right panel, and it came off the track completely and landed in the entry vestibule, and they were inside before it stopped moving. Behind them came a lieutenant colonel in full tactical dress. I saw the rank and the unit patch simultaneously. The unit patch first, because the unit patch told me more, and behind him 4 more operators establishing a perimeter in the ER bay with the specific efficiency of a team that has done this in worse rooms than this one. Grantham came out of Bay 7. What is, "You cannot bring weapons into a medical, sir," the lieutenant colonel said, in the tone of a man issuing a one-time notification. Step back. Grantham did not step back. He was not accustomed to being issued one-time notifications. I am the chief of emergency medicine, and I'm telling you, step back, the lieutenant colonel said again, with exactly the same inflection, as if the first time had been a courtesy, and this time was simply the instruction. Grantham stepped back. I have thought about that moment several times since. There was no threat in the voice. There was simply a quality that made argument feel like a misuse of everyone's time. The lieutenant colonel looked at the nurse's station. He looked at the bay corridor. He looked at the resident who had flattened himself against the supply room door. His men had established the perimeter. He was looking for someone, not a patient, a person. He took one step forward into the center of the ER. "Ghost," he said. One word, not a question. The word landed in the room like a weight dropped on a surface. You felt it before you processed it. Nobody moved. The resident looked around. Sandra looked around. Ferrara looked around. Every person in that ER turned, searching the room for whoever the word belonged to, because it clearly belonged to someone, and that someone was clearly not any of the people they expected it to be. I was in the corridor. I was looking at the floor, at the place where the linoleum met the baseboard, at the specific, unremarkable detail of a floor I had walked 40 times a night for 22 months. My hands had stopped shaking. I noticed that. I was the only person in my sightline who had not turned to look for the source of the word, because I already knew exactly where the source of the word was standing, and she was looking at the baseboard. I heard him take one more step. Toward the corridor. Toward me. I looked up. The lieutenant colonel was looking at me directly, not searching, not scanning. He had found what he was looking for. He looked at me the way someone looks at a person they have been told is in this building and have been looking for since before their boots hit the ground. "Ghost," he said again, quieter to me. I looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not Ghost anymore," I said. "I'm Danny Reeves. I'm the night float." "Not tonight," he said. "We have a JSOC operator down. Blast trauma, open abdominal injury, femoral compromise. Your former CO told us you were here. He said if we needed the best trauma intervention available in this city, we didn't need the chief of surgery." He paused. "We needed you." The SAT alarm was still going in Bay 7. Kowalski was still in there. And then I heard, under the SAT alarm, a second alarm, from the ambulance bay, where his operators had brought the patient in through the side entrance, while the lieutenant colonel walked the perimeter. I heard the specific sound of a vitals machine registering a pressure that was not compatible with the next 10 minutes. I looked at Bay 7. I made a decision. "Kowalski first," I said. "Then yours." The lieutenant colonel looked at Bay 7. Back at me. One nod. I pushed off the wall. My walk to Bay 7 was not the walk I had used for 22 months. Something in the architecture of it was different. Not faster, not harder, but direct in a way that 22 months of cart pushing had trained out, and that came back in the length of a corridor. I pushed through the bay door. Grantham was at the bedside, Ferrara beside him, both of them watching a monitor that was telling them something they did not have a fast answer for. I looked at the monitor. I looked at Kowalski. "Tension pneumothorax developing on the left side," I said. "He needs needle decompression now." Grantham turned. "I did not ask for move," I said. My voice had changed. Not in volume, in something harder to name, the texture of it, the specific quality that comes from years of using it in places where being misunderstood had a cost that everyone in the room could see and nobody wanted to be responsible for. It was not a voice that waited. Grantham moved. He moved the way people move when something in a room has shifted, and they have not yet processed what it is, but their body has understood it before their mind caught up. I was at the bedside. My hands moved. I want to be accurate about this. They moved before I consciously registered the sequence. 12 years of muscle memory does not wait for the brain to issue the order. I found the second intercostal space on the left chest wall, mid-clavicular line. The same landmark, the same angle, the same 3 count I'd learned from a Special Forces medic named Ortega on a forward base outside Kandahar in 2013, who had taught me the technique on a sandbag in the dark, because he said you needed to be able to find it blind. And I'd practiced until I could. And I had the 14-gauge angiocath in, and the air was escaping before Ferrara had finished his sentence about liability. Kowalski's oxygen saturation climbed. I watched the number. It climbed. His eyes found me. "You with me?" I said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I'm with you." "Good." I stepped back. "Get him to CT, left chest, rule out hemothorax." I looked at Ferrara. He was already moving. And then I turned to the lieutenant colonel, who was standing in the bay doorway with 2 of his operators, and I said, "Show me your man." The operator, his name was Tanner, 26, and he had the look of someone who had been this close to not making it for long enough that close had started to feel normal, was in the ambulance bay on a field litter, and the damage was exactly what the lieutenant colonel had described, plus the thing he hadn't, which was a secondary arterial bleed behind the primary presentation that a less experienced eye would have missed, and that would have killed Tanner in the time it took to get him to a surgical suite without intervention. I didn't miss it. I haven't missed that particular presentation since I first saw it in 2014, in a trauma tent outside Kandahar, on a night that I still do not allow myself to think about all the way to the end. I need a tourniquet proximal to the left inguinal ligament, a pressure pack on the secondary bleed at the right iliac fossa. Apply it here, this angle. Don't shift it once it's seated. And I need 4 units of ONEG moving now and a surgical team on standby for the abdominal repair. I looked at the operator nearest me. "Can you hold this pressure exactly where my hands are?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Then take it." He took it. His hands were steady. "Good. Mine were already moving to the next problem. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, start to confirmed stabilization." I know the time. I always know the time. "She moved," one of the operators said, "from somewhere behind me, to no one in particular, like someone who's done this in worse places than this." Nobody disagreed. The lieutenant colonel stepped forward. The ER bay was quiet in the particular way it goes quiet after a crisis has peaked, and the room is recalibrating. Sandra was at the station with her hand over her mouth. The resident had not moved from the doorway. Grantham was standing at the edge of Bay 7 with an expression that I will describe specifically because he earned it. The muscles around his eyes had gone slack. The way muscles go slack when the architecture of a belief collapses and there is nothing yet to replace it. He had an expression for competence. He had an expression for authority. He had no expression that covered what he had just watched. The lieutenant colonel looked at him. He looked at Sandra. He looked at the resident, at Ferrara, at the tech who had been standing in the corridor doorway for the last 7 minutes holding a blood draw he'd forgotten to deliver. For the record, the lieutenant colonel said, "This is Warrant Officer Danielle Reeves, formerly of the 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Operations Combat Medic, 3 combat tours, Kandahar, Helmand, and 1 theater I'm not at liberty to name. Call sign Ghost. She holds a Distinguished Service Cross for the Kandahar airfield action in November 2014, during which she maintained forward trauma operations alone for 43 minutes under active fire and is credited with the confirmed survival of 19 U.S. personnel." He paused. He looked at Grantham specifically, with the specific quality of a gaze that has decided that one person in the room needs to understand who they have been laughing at. She is, without qualification, the most capable combat trauma medic my command has ever requested by name. The room was silent. Around him, without a word, without a signal I saw passed between them, 6 operators and the lieutenant colonel came to attention. The sound of their gear, plates settling, straps drawing taut, the small, precise mechanical shift of people who carry weight and know how to carry it, was the only sound in the bay. They rendered a salute. All of them. Simultaneously, the kind of salute that is not a formality. I returned it. Sandra was crying. The resident was looking at the floor. Grantham was looking at me with the expression of a man standing at the site of something he cannot undo, trying to locate in himself the resource to respond appropriately to it, and finding the inventory short. He was placed on a performance review the following week. Torres's case, Kowalski's delayed treatment, the 40-minute SAT decline, the documentation of my flagged observation being overridden, went to the Department Quality Board. Sandra told me about it in the break room on a Thursday. I listened. I did not feel triumph, exactly. I felt the particular quiet that follows a correct outcome that should have arrived sooner. Tanner survived. The surgery took 4 hours, and he walked, eventually, with a slight hitch in his left stride that I am told his team considers a badge. I received a message about it through channels I am also not at liberty to describe. He is fine. I was back on the floor at 4:15. The east corridor in the pre-dawn had that specific blue-gray light that comes before sunrise, the one that isn't dark enough to call night and isn't bright enough to call morning, and I pushed the cart to Supply A, and I opened the top drawer, and I began neatly restocking the compression bandages, whose count, I noted, was exactly what I had said it was. The building was quiet. The lights hummed. It smelled like antiseptic and floor cleaner. Still here. Still whole. If Danny's story stayed with you, if it hit somewhere you didn't expect, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the channel. We tell the stories of quiet heroes who never asked for recognition and never needed it. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one reaches.